Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. They say ignorance is bliss. They also say what you don't know can't hurt you. But both aphorisms, while containing a degree of truth, are actually quite deceiving. Ignorance can actually be quite painful. Not knowing that touching a hot stove can result in a nasty burn can leave a toddler vulnerable to harm. And ignorance of a topic doesn't provide you with some magical protection from pain. I may not know that others are spreading lies about me, but when the news finally reaches my ears, it will be just as painful as if I had heard it firsthand. In Isaiah 44, verses 9 through 20, God is going to confront the people of Judah about their ignorance concerning idols. They were seemingly blind to just how ridiculous their love affair with false gods really was. So God goes out of his way to expose the absurd nature of their infatuation with false gods. Yet they couldn't see it. They were ignorant of it, so they just kept doing it. Sin has a way of deluding us and destroying our ability to see reality. They could take a single log and use part of it to create a god to worship and another part to create a fire for warmth, and never see the absurdity of it all. God has made himself perfectly clear by boldly declaring, "Besides me there is no God." Isaiah 44, verse 6. Then, as if to see if his audience has gotten the message, he asks, "Is there a God besides me?" Isaiah 44, verse 8. And just in case they failed to know the answer to the question, he gave his divine opinion. "I know not any." Isaiah 44, verse 8. He has established himself as the Creator God, the one who made Israel. He is Jehovah, the King of Israel. He is their Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, the first and the last. And he alone is able to declare what is to come and what will happen. Isaiah 44, verse 7. And yet the people of Judah continued to worship false gods, idols they had made with their own hands. They had substituted worship of and reverence for the one true God with the adoration of lifeless and powerless statues made of wood and stone. And God systematically and somewhat sarcastically exposes the absurdity of their actions. Over time, the people of Israel had adopted an assortment of pagan gods, from Baal and Moloch to Ashtaroth and Shamash. The Israelites seemed to be equal opportunity idolaters. They weren't picky, and they never really replaced the worship of Yahweh. They simply added the other gods to the mix, creating a confusing, syncretistic amalgamation of gods for virtually every occasion. But God Almighty had warned them about this very thing. All the way back when Moses was leading them to the Promised Land, God had provided them with the 10 Commandments. And the very first command on the list had been, "You shall have no other gods before me." Exodus 20, verse 3. And he would later expand on that command, providing them with clear and irrefutable details regarding his expectations. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." Deuteronomy 5, verses 8 through 10. And yet the people of Israel had proven themselves incapable of obeying this very command. All that God had told them not to do, they had done, knowingly and repeatedly. They were operating out of obstinance, not ignorance. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew it was wrong. So God decides to show them the sheer lunacy behind their actions. How foolish are those who manufacture idols. These prized objects are really worthless. The people who worship idols don't know this, so they are all put to shame. Isaiah 44, verse 9. Notice that God uses the third person. It's as if he's asking the people of Judah to consider how idiotic it is for those other nations to worship false gods. He wants them to step back and take a long, close look at just how ridiculous idolatry really is. Who but a fool would make his own god, an idol that cannot help him one bit? Isaiah 44, verse 10. That had to have hurt. God was not pulling any punches, but wanted them to see the sheer stupidity of what they were doing. Not only were they disobeying his commands, they were doing it while worshiping gods they had made with their own hands. And God goes out of his way to ridicule them as mere humans who claim they can make a god. Isaiah 44, verse 11. God paints the image of a craftsman working diligently to manufacture the tool he will use to construct the God he's going to worship. His efforts leave him worn out before he has even begun to make his God. The energy required to make the god he is going to worship leaves him hungry and faint. God describes a woodcarver going through the process of selecting just the right tree from which to make his god. Then he proceeds to cut it down, carefully delineating which part of the log will become his god, and which part he can use to build a fire to keep himself warm. He cuts down cedars. He selects the cypress and the oak. He plants the pine in the forest to be nourished by the rain. Then he uses part of the wood to make a fire. With it he warms himself and bakes his bread. Then, yes, it's true, he takes the rest of it and makes himself a god to worship. He makes an idol and bows down in front of it. Isaiah 44, verses 14 through 15. When you step back and examine idolatry from an objective viewpoint, it's not difficult to see just how ridiculous it appears. But God says, the people who worship idols don't know this. Isaiah 44, verse 9. They're blind to the reality of their actions. They are incapable of seeing just how bizarre and nonsensical their efforts appear. Which is why God goes out of his way to expose the sheer stupidity of what is going on in Judah. They enjoyed the privilege of being created by the one true God and being chosen as his prized possession. And yet they were busy creating their own gods out of wood and stone and expected these man-made deities to provide for and protect them. He burns part of the tree to roast his meat and to keep himself warm. He says, "Ah, that fire feels good." Then he takes what's left and makes his god, a carved idol. He falls down in front of it, worshiping and praying to it. "Rescue me," he says. "You are my God." Isaiah 44, verses 16 and 17. And while it may be easy for us to judge the people of Judah and question their sanity, we would be wise to examine our own lives to see if we might be guilty of the very same thing. Their sin seems blatant to us, but God reveals that they were blind to it. Such stupidity and ignorance. Their eyes are closed and they cannot see. Their minds are shut and they cannot think. Isaiah 44, verse 18. They couldn't see what they were doing. And if we're wise, we'll recognize that we have the same capacity to blindly and ignorantly worship gods made with human hands. While our idols may appear more sophisticated and less religious in nature, they are false gods nonetheless. Tim Keller, in his book Counterfeit Gods, describes an idol in terms that may make you a bit uncomfortable. Quote, "What is an idol? It is anything more important to you than God, anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God, anything you seek to give you what only God can give. An idol is whatever you look at and say, in your heart of hearts, if I have that, then I'll feel my life has meaning. Then I'll know I have value. Then I'll feel significant and secure." There are many ways to describe that kind of relationship to something, but perhaps the best one is worship. End quote. When put in those terms, it becomes a bit more easy to see how we can have idols in spite of our more enlightened and sophisticated mindset. And like the people of Judah, we can find ourselves deluded and unaware of the fact that we have created substitutes for God. We have turned to other things in the hopes that they might deliver what only God is capable of providing: peace, hope, security, joy, contentment, satisfaction, and salvation. And God warns that we all run the same risk the people of Judah did. If we're not careful, we will find ourselves putting our hope in the wrong God and failing to recognize the futility of our actions. He trusts something that can't help him at all, yet he cannot bring himself to ask, "Is this idol that I'm holding in my hand a lie?" Isaiah 44, verse 20.